I apologize, we're starting a little late, but we thought we'd give people some extra time to trudge through our wonderful November weather. Um, on behalf of the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership and the Mendoza College of Business, welcome to another installment of the annual Berges Lecture Series, and thank you all for coming. My name is John Sikorsky, and I serve as a faculty fellow at the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership, as well as an assistant teaching professor in the Business Ethics and Society program. Today, we are happy to host what should be a fascinating discussion, which will be introduced by one of our very own students, Sofia Cordoba Vasquez, a sophomore here at Notre Dame studying international economics and global affairs, who is originally from Bogota, Colombia. Sofia is one of our international business scholars in a weekly colloquium dedicated to discussing pertinent issues in honorable and ethical business. So, Sofia, come on up, and she will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Professor Sikorsky. It is our distinct pleasure today to have with us Dr. Chris Arnade. Dr. Arnade earned a PhD in theoretical physics from Johns Hopkins University and went on to work on Wall Street as a bond trader for nearly 20 years before pursuing a remarkable career shift. And that is what we will be talking about today. After shifting away from his Wall Street career, Chris Arnade decided to document poverty and addiction in the Bronx. He began interviewing, photographing, and becoming close friends with homeless addicts, and spent hours in drug dens and McDonald's. Then he started driving across America to see how the rest of the country compared. He found the same types of stories everywhere, across lines of race, ethnicity, religion, and geography. Dr. Arnade documented his journey in his profound book, Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America, which was available to the first 50 students in the audience today. Professor Gregory Robson, visiting faculty in the Mendoza College of Business and faculty fellow of the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership, will be moderating our discussion today. It should be a terrific discussion, so please join me in giving Dr. Arnade a warm Notre Dame welcome.
Well, thank you, Sophia and Professor Sikorsky, and thank you all for coming on a snowy South Bend day. It's a real treat to be here with you, Dr. Arnade. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you very much.
So let's begin at the beginning. Let's hear a little bit about your early years. If you could tell us a bit about when you were growing up, about college and your decision to pursue a PhD in theoretical physics, and then after that, we'll turn a bit to your decision to go to Wall Street.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and I apologize about my appearance, but when I left Wall Street, I promised never to again wear a suit. I was basically a math prodigy as a kid. I grew up in a small working class Catholic community, 500 people in Florida, and I basically fell into math because it was easy to me. If you had asked me when I entered college if I would ever end up on Wall Street, it was absolutely the last thing I would do. Had no interest in it, didn't know what it was. My mother didn't particularly like it because the bank took away her family farm when she was a kid. And I went to Wall Street. I went to college, studied math, got completely immersed in that. Got so immersed into it that I ended up going to get a PhD in particle physics from Johns Hopkins because, as odd as it may sound, it was a path of least resistance. It was very easy to do. I didn't have to get a job. I could just study more math. In some ways, in retrospect, to think about this conversation coming up a little bit, I was also a way of not having to deal with ethics. You just study math. It's just a problem to solve. You don't have to think about anything beyond that. At some point along the way in grad school, I realized that it wasn't particularly what I wanted to do my entire life. I think in sometimes, I'm not sure at the time I recognized it, but looking back now, I realized that it was a little bit too isolated, a little bit too removed from, the real world. And I was searching for something that gave me a little bit a perspective on how the world worked. And at the time, this was 1993, Wall Street was starting to hire people who were good at math. I used to say that they basically only hired lacrosse bros, people who were kind of frat brothers who, who played lacrosse. Somehow not football players, only lacrosse players. But Wall Street was getting more complex. The world was growing. Finance was growing. It was become interconnected. Computers were starting to show up on people's desks. These financial products were being invented. And they had started realizing that the people who were servicing their computers, the new computers arriving on their desk, were actually understood the products, the new products that were showing up on the trading floor better than the traders did, the lacrosse bros did. So they started hiring a few, what they would lovingly call their geeks into Wall Street. And so I became one of the first rocket scientists. I ended up in Salomon Brothers in 1993. It's the book that Michael Lewis wrote about in Liar's Poker. If you've seen the movie The Big Short, that's basically me sitting at a wall of computers, trading bonds and betting on people's lives, or betting on countries by looking at numbers up on the screen.
So you worked for 20 years in the bond market on Wall Street, and you got your start as a quantitative analyst.
Correct.
As you know, many of our undergraduates hope to work on Wall Street, in finance, on Wall Street or elsewhere. Could you say a bit to them about some of the pluses and minuses, the real opportunities and challenges that they might face on Wall Street?
I would never say not to go to Wall Street. I had a really good, especially the first 10 years of my life, they were really wonderful. It was intellectually extraordinarily challenging. I met some of the brightest people I've ever met in my life. I got to see the world. I was traveling all over the world, and I got paid very well. Those things are all important, especially when you were at my age at the time, at 27, and kind of wanted to start a family. I think there were somewhere around my 10th year, I started feeling a little bit disillusioned with the career. And some of it had to do with ethics. I think one of the hardest things to know when you go into it is how your industry is going to change you. You can generally find yourself creeping towards a new person in these slow decisions that you don't know you're making. It's very easy to go with the crowd when the crowd is multimillionaires. So I think the industry over my career changed from going to being, I entered in a company, Salomon Brothers, that was 5,000 employees around the world, and the head of the company was literally two bosses above me until the end, when it was 150,000 people. And I couldn't tell you who the boss was. He was probably 30 people ahead of me, 30 levels behind me, or ahead of me, above me. But if you go on Wall Street with the right attitude and with the right mindset of knowing who you are and knowing what your ethical guardrails are, you can have a wonderful career and a really fulfilling career where you meet very interesting people, make enough money to build a family, and also learn a lot about the way the world works, especially the business world.
Now, is careerism a real danger, and can you say a bit about the relevant guardrails to prevent that?
Yeah, I think, if I was talking to a different audience rather than at Notre Dame, I would say that, one of the things that's helpful is to maintain some sort of something outside of business, something that's more than just your career. Have something like family or faith. But I think here, I think faith is kind of one of those things that I don't have to necessarily tell you is important to have to keep your life in balance. But I certainly think that you need something other than just Wall Street can consume you. It can become everything about you. They'll ask you to, you can get paid a lot if it does, but it's very, very helpful to have something, some perspective outside of you, outside of the office that reminds you that you're very, very fortunate to be there, and this is not the normal, human experience.
So you've told me that you're an avid walker. So you've spent time here in South Bend already walking around, getting to know people in South Bend, not just on Notre Dame's campus, but around town. When you worked on Wall Street, you decided to start walking into other areas of New York City. So at the start of the book, of Dignity, you say, and I quote, "I first walked into the Hunts Point neighborhood of the Bronx because I was told not to. I was told it was too dangerous, too poor, and that I was too white. I was told that," to quote, "nobody goes there for anything other than drugs and prostitutes." You note that the people telling you this were well-off colleagues and neighbors and friends who were fellow academics. So, Dr. Arnade, where did you walk in New York City and why? And whom did you meet?
The why is the balance. The balance. I at the time didn't have faith. I had a family, but I needed some other perspective of the career I was on, and so my walks were that perspective, or attempt to have that perspective, to realize, to remember, to remind myself that Wall Street wasn't reality, or not. It was a reality, but it was a very narrow reality. So I'd go on these extraordinarily long walks, 20 miles, and as the financial crisis happened in 2008, which impacted my company, sent the stock down from 50 to 2 in I think 3 days, to kind of deal with the stress, to give myself some perspective. I started going on more of these walks, and I started going into neighborhoods that I was basically told not to go to. It was, for me, extraordinarily eye-opening, because I had thought that I had a perspective, because I was, the way I voted, I read papers about poverty, I worried about poverty, I gave to charities, but to actually walk into East New York or to walk into Hunts Point and just spend a day there was a very different experience. And between that perspective and then what I was kind of becoming disillusioned with Wall Street in terms of post-financial crisis, the two kind of worked together to make me feel like maybe this wasn't a career I should do for many more years.
And so tell us a bit about how you got to know people. So whom did you get to know and how? You mentioned spending time at McDonald's, for example. Can you say a bit about how you got to know people, say, starting in New York City when you're taking these walks?
Yeah, I mean, it was just really just a matter of, so much of what you do on Wall Street in my career was telling people, was ordering people around, was like thinking my opinion was the best because, I was making the most money, or I was winning on trades. The financial crisis kind of changed a lot. It's kind of where I really started thinking that maybe we didn't know everything. Maybe we weren't the ones who were right about everything. And maybe we had messed up. And so I started listening more. And I made a real point of just talking to everybody I met along my walks. I had at some point brought a camera on one of my walks, and that really changed everything. People would ask me to take their picture, and when they would ask me to take their picture, they would tell me about their lives, and I would just listen. And they would take me. They started inviting me into bars, into restaurants, to go visit their house. Just basically, just becoming kind of what I call micro friends along these walks. And I would just, instead of turning them down in the past, kind of out of fear were saying like, I got to get to Shea Stadium. I'm walking to Shea Stadium. I was like, okay, sure, I'll go. And the whole process evolved from one of walking to relieve my stress to kind of a new way to learn, a way that wasn't about numbers. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't learning about from numbers. I was learning from people, and they weren't statistics. They were actually real people, and it was just a matter of just really engaging people on their terms, at their level, and not being the person who says, when they say something I disagree with, saying, well, actually, just actually listening and hearing what they had to say.
That's really interesting. So can you say a bit about the value of photography in really capturing elements of people's lives and saying a lot more than the written word? So you're not just a trained theoretical physicist and bond trader, but you're also a trained photographer. And one part about the book, Dignity, that really stood out to me were the pictures that you had of people's lives, that we could reference when reading the book, to get a sense of who we're talking to get a sense of the people you're mentioning who are central figures in the book. So can you say a bit about the value of photography?
Yeah, one of the things that along my course of walks, as I evolved, I started spending more time with the homeless, and not with just the homeless, but with kind of within the homeless community, the people who were the most stigmatized, which is the addicts. And I was getting to know them in a way that, as people, as individuals. And some of them were, people who in the past I would have done my best not to look at. I would have certainly not given them money. I would have, done that thing where you go around the corner, you see them coming, or you just go around the corner because you don't want to deal with it. And what I was trying to do with the photography was force the viewer to look at the person who people don't look at, and have them look at the camera as a person. And for that 5 seconds or so that you look at the picture, see them as a person, not as a problem. And it was interesting. The photography actually led before the writing, and so as the walks evolved into kind of this project to kind of give people a view of something they might not want to look at, I realized that the pictures alone were not telling the whole story. That there was much more to this person than just a sympathetic face. There was a backstory, there was a context. And so I ended up starting to write. I would post these pictures online, and then I started adding more and more details, and the details became basically essays because they had a lot to say.
That's fascinating. So I'm a philosopher with some background in economics, and I'm fascinated by the complexity of individuals' lives and also the complexity of societies. Can you say a bit for us about the distinction you draw between front row America and back row America, and maybe complexify our picture a bit? Give us a sense of who constitutes back row America? Yeah,
so, while I was doing this, it wasn't just entirely, I couldn't lose my math and physics background. I was always theorizing about what I saw, always building a model. And so I was spending all this time in it was just a really weird position in my life where there was like a 2-year period where I was still working in Wall Street and doing these more and more of this type of photojournalism. And I would be, kind of in the morning on a trading floor, yelling about somebody at some billion-dollar deal that failed, and then at night, in a crack house, trying to help someone getting the detox. And then the two just couldn't, the juxtaposition was too much even for me, and so I ended up quitting my Wall Street career. But kind of having a foot in both worlds, besides seeing the inequality, the vast inequality and injustices we all know about, I was trying to figure out what was the difference here. There was a lot going on, and I started seeing between this walk and some of the work I did outside of the Bronx, I started thinking, that kind of the division in the country, in our country, which we all know there's a lot of divides in our country, was much more about education. What kind of was everybody on the trading floor with me and all the friends in my neighborhoods, despite coming from different places, different countries, despite being of different races and different faiths, all were very similar in that we all had kind of postgraduate degrees. And that kind of made us very similar in how we thought. Whereas the people I was dealing with in my photojournalism work, black, white, Muslim, Catholic, in big cities and rural areas, were also very similar in many ways and facing a lot of the same problems. And what they had in common was they didn't have that elite education. And I think that elite education, what I kind of said, the front row for the people like myself who have PhDs and things like that, and the back row for kind of everybody else, is kind of what really is the biggest division in our country. It's kind of the one that it's not just about superficial things. It's about very, very deep things about how we see ourselves and our place in the universe.
And can you say a bit about how the divisions in our country help us, well, not help us, but the divisions in our country cause us, rather, to not really be close with one another, and how we can overcome the divisions and better see the dignity of people across various ideological and other lines?
I'm not sure I can answer how to overcome the part, but
not an easy question, right?
But I think the problem with the divisions is they're very much a division about, how we view the world and how we view our place in the world. So they're not these kind of superficial things; they're very deep things. When I think about the front row, and a lot of us in here are that, and it's not a prerogative term. It's not a negative term. It just is. It's just a label. But we're very devoted to our careers, and that's kind of where the primary source of who we are. That's how we value ourselves. Now, again, if I said that at Harvard or at Princeton, that I'd feel much more comfortable with that. But I'm saying that here in Notre Dame, and I know a lot of you are religious, so it's this is a bit of a different situation. But it's generally secular careerists who kind of really are just grounded in the material. It's a very transactional, material view of the world, almost a very positivistic view of the world. What matters is how much stuff you make, and how you think about what's right and wrong is let the data decide. That's a very Wall Street mindset. When you just let the data decide without an ethical framework beneath that, it can lead to some very bad outcomes. And in the back row, it's a lot more about faith. It's a lot more experiential. It's a lot more about community and community outside of work, community within church, community within family, community and within literal community, the place you come from. And so it's a very deep division, and I think to how do you overcome it? I'm not really sure how.
It seems like we can read, we can think about the division, we can try to understand it ourselves, but without personal experiences, without getting to know drug addicts, for example, one can't fully appreciate what they're going through, can't fully appreciate their dignity as human persons. So could you say a bit more about the dignity of the poor, to kind of riff on the title of your book, The Dignity of the Addicted, of sex workers, of all people?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure I can define dignity, but I know the opposite when I see it, and I think there's a real sense of, there's a knowledge among, one of the biggest issues when you spend time with addicts and you spend time with the homeless is they know they're disliked. They certainly believe they know they're ostracized. They know they're pariahs. They know that people consider them losers, and often they consider themselves losers. And that kind of isolation, that kind of knowledge that you're you're an outcast. That knowledge that you're not wanted, you're not allowed into certain spaces, that you're not valued for who you are. You're somebody that you have to walk around as opposed to engage is something that they're very aware of and acutely aware of. And so they know they're not respected by any community. And in that sense, they feel like their dignity has been denied.
All right, so a long question here with some setup. It's a question about how the love of God can help one to overcome the pain of addiction. So in chapter 3 of the book, you tell the story of Bruce. After a childhood of abuse and neglect, Bruce did manual labor most of his life, but sadly, one day he fell off a ladder, breaking his neck. Now, Dr. Arnade, Bruce said to you, and here I quote Bruce from the book, "I broke my neck in '93, and they started pushing pain pills on me, and soon I was hooked. I am shamed," Bruce said, "by my dealing and buying of pills, shamed. That isn't who I am." Then Bruce said, "I got saved at 50. It changed me. I had never felt worthy before of being saved. I was too dumb. Now I understand I am worthy of the Lord." When you are told all your life you're dumb, unworthy, you start believing it. God changed that for me. So here's the question. It's sometimes said that to know what's worth living for, you have to know what's worth dying for. It's also said that in dying in the love of God for the atonement of our sins, Christ taught us precisely this message. So Dr. Arnade, can you tell us a bit about how Christ has worked in the lives of the addicts you have met? How has Christ helped people to overcome true despair, truly debilitating addictions?
Yeah, I didn't go into this work wanting to see the power of faith. I was, I guess, I was an atheist, but I wasn't one of the jerky kinds. I was open-minded, but hearing stories stories from Bruce and many others like him, there's just no way I could intellectually, honestly say that faith doesn't have an immense role in the lives of the poor. But most importantly, and it's not just a utilitarian thing, it's not just something that's, the poor need because the poor are simple-minded. It's much deeper than that. It's that, they understand at a very deeper level. They see it every day that how life is fleeting, here on earth is fleeting, and how there's just things that we have to accept that are beyond our control and much bigger than us. And that, call it what you will, it's something is out there that is larger than the human experience. And there's absolutely no way, I have not seen anybody in my work who hasn't gotten out of the lifestyle of addiction and homelessness, who hasn't done so without the help of a church. It's just simply, it's the only thing that I've seen that has led to people emerging from addiction into building something, a life that's more stable than the life they have.
Now, you've spent time here in Indiana and also in nearby Chicago. So turning to a different topic. So you spent some time recently here in South Bend and also in Gary, Indiana. You spent time in Chicago. Can you say a bit about what you saw near us around here? In the book you mentioned, for example, that Gary has a fair number of rusted factories and overgrown lots, but also people who are really proud of where they come from if they grew up in Gary. What have your experiences been like here in Indiana, and can you tell us some things that undergraduates or all of us who don't yet know about the community around us could benefit from knowing?
Yeah, I think, Notre Dame is a wonderful campus, but it's also kind of an island of privilege. And I think, again, if I was on a different campus, I would kind of I think a lot of people would be upset hearing that, but I think people here in Notre Dame have an awareness of that, and that's the first start. You know, you go, you know, 4 miles from here, and there's a very different situation, very different country, very different place, and people dealing with very different problems. You know, the question isn't to them, you know, if I'm going to go work on Wall Street or if I'm going to go work at McKinsey, it's going to be, you know, am I going to get a job? That kind of, I really think going back to one of the very first conversations we've had here about how to maintain balance on Wall Street is never forgetting that. And it's extraordinarily easy to forget that. You know, if you want to understand how business decisions and economic decisions can change people's lives for the negative, which they can do, go to Gary, Indiana. It's not far from here. It's about an hour and a half, I believe. Town that's 90% black, that still has one steel mill, but it's you know, it's a rough, wonderful people, but it's a rough town. You know, there's a lot of dysfunction. Downtown that's entirely boarded up, and churches that are boarded up. And I think it's really important to maintain that perspective when you're in the business community, and not at arm's length perspective, not simply by reading books, not simply by reading articles, but actually getting out into the communities and taking part. You know, just spend a Sunday in a park in a neighborhood you might not want to spend a park in. You might not want to spend a Sunday in, you know, a neighborhood that you think might be a little bit dodgy. I think you'll recognize, you know, do charity work, and but hands-on charity work in communities that are, you know, kind of adjacent to where your job is, but in a very different kind of economic zip code. You know, the people I've met on Wall Street, the friends I have on Wall Street, who's kind of managed to stay ethically clean, maintain a kind of solid head on their shoulders, are people who you know, who really had activities outside of the work, beyond just the family.
So on communities of color, you've traveled around the entire United States. Can you tell us a bit about what you've learned about the prevalence and severity of racism across the United States today? This is a pretty important theme in your book.
Yeah, you know, two of the cities I highlight in my book is Selma and Gary, Indiana. And you know, I think a lot of people look at Selma as kind of a success story of the civil rights, and it's kind of trotted out in front of the cameras once a year during the anniversaries of the marches. But it's also, you know, while it is a symbolic success, it's not a success story on the ground. Selma, Alabama is extraordinarily poor, has a lot of addiction, has a lot of immense poverty. And it's just a reminder that while the civil rights movement did a lot, was certainly needed, there is still systematic racism in the U.S., even though you know, legally now it's outlawed. And that, again, this is another one of those things I think is very healthy to maintain a perspective that, you know, I think I can tell you, and you know, from working in a Wall Street office, you know, a lot of the traders felt like they themselves weren't racist because of how they voted, and the fact that we hired a few black people. But they, you know, they would never go into the neighborhoods I went to. If I invited them to go to, like, you know, I remember like when I was in Milwaukee, I went up to North Side and hung out in the Catfish Lounge, and you know, I got a lot of kind of texts when the people saw that I was doing it saying, be careful, don't get murdered, you know, from people who claimed to be people who were very worried about racism. So I think you have to do more than just kind of say you're not a racist, more than do just say you're not. You want to fix the injustices in our country. You actually have to try to live it and really, you know, not be scared of going to certain neighborhoods, not be scared of engaging people who don't look like you, and not be scared about treating them like equals.
So you've been very gracious with your time, and I have a couple of more questions before we turn it over to the audience. So perhaps the students in the audience, you can prepare some of your questions as we're talking up here about these. So you mentioned that you, and this is on faith, during your time going around America and going to a lot of different communities, you switched from being a vegetarian atheist to a Big Mac eating churchgoer.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit about that? How did the switch from vegetarianism affect your life, and how about the switch from atheism as well?
The switch from atheism was the biggest one. I mean, that's kind of the one that of all the things that I've done in my life, of all the things that came out of my project, is kind of the biggest personal change. And you know, I think everybody here knows what a big change that would be. In terms of the vegetarianism, that was a simple one that, you know, I used to say atheism was an intellectual luxury, but vegetarianism is definitely a luxury. And if you're spending time in poor neighborhoods, you can't not eat meat. There's nothing else available. But also, it was just an extraordinarily limiting way of dealing with life. But also, I was spending time in McDonald's, because that's where a lot of homeless addicts spend time in McDonald's. It's one of the few places that allows a homeless person to kind of sit and just regain a little bit of dignity, in the sense of being able to rejoin society without being kind of kicked out. And so I was using McDonald's for the same reason they do, to stay away from the cold or the heat, or to recharge my computer, or to sit and work, or just kind of, you know, chill out for a few hours. And see, if you spend enough time at McDonald's, you can start eating their food because it's good.
Seems pretty natural, right? So one last question before we open it up for discussion. So you discussed the epidemic of loneliness, and this is, I think, a really poignant discussion in the book. What is loneliness, and why does it matter? And also, what might our undergraduates benefit, or how might they benefit from knowing about the dangers of loneliness? Whether it's from life stuck behind a screen, for example, or from spending one's days by oneself at home, or in long hours at the office.
Yeah, I was just having lunch with some undergraduates before this thing, and I told them, I said, I don't give up on friends. I have a motley crew of friends from all my different careers, and I don't care about their political views. I don't care about their religious views. I've maintained these friendships as the best I can all my life. And I think that's kind of the advice I would give to people, is just, you know, never give up on a friend. Because people need each other. That's kind of the thing I saw in my work, the power of kind of community, the power of having somebody there who can understand you or listening to you. People really need each other. And you know, I think we've, again, in a very material, transactional world, what we've turned into, you know, one of the kind of negative things on Wall Street is often people treat meeting a new person as a business transaction. You know, it's like you size somebody up and going, well, what can you do for me? Not, you know, what can we do for each other? Or not, do we just get along? Can we support each other emotionally? And so I think, you know, kind of we're bombarded with so many stimuli these days that it's very easy to kind of give up on people and kind of just immerse yourself in kind of digital world. And I think that's extraordinarily dangerous. And, you know, and we move around so much. You know, we just jump from job to job, city to city, that we can just, you know, you just give up on people, or just forget about people. And you think that because, you know, you'd see them on Facebook, they're still somehow. But I really think that being kind of getting involved with people on a personal level is kind of the one thing that will keep your, you know, if you end up on Wall Street or end up at McKinsey or whatever, try to maintain your college friendships, you know, really kind of, even for the people who go into different careers, just to maintain, again, your perspective.
Well, thank you. So in the spirit of human flourishing and enhancing it by connecting with others, we can turn now to Q&A. It'd be great to hear from some members of the audience which questions you might have. So if you would, just put a hand up and we will get a microphone to you, and we can take it from there.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. My name is Dominic. I'm a junior, actually from the Bronx. Both of my parents from the Dominican Republic.
What part of the Bronx?
Near St. Barnabas in like East Tremont, so not too far off from like Fordham University.
So you know Hunts Point?
Yeah, yeah. I have some family members who work there in some of the shipping yards. But I guess more or less my question is, to end up at like a university at Notre Dame, I would say my parents had to shelter me a lot in terms of just like the realness of like America and just like even the Bronx. And like from your experiences and like now for like me being here, I've been able to like have my eyes opened. I was wondering how is it, even if it's possible to just teach children or just kids about like the realness of the world without removing their innocence in a way, or if there's even a way to do that.
Do you mean your parents sheltered you for the bad things, right?
Yeah, like shelter me away from the bad things so
Right.
that I could just focus on school.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, congratulations to being here, by the way. I know to get to Notre Dame from the Bronx is a big step, man. You know, one of the things I am curious to hear what you said, but one of the things I saw in the Bronx was a lot of kids, it's very hard to stay focused enough to end up at Notre Dame because you have all these things pulling you in different directions. But your question is about the other way, how to get Notre Dame kids into to understand the Bronx. Is that?
I guess like more or less like in terms of just like maybe for your children, like teaching them like that perspective and like how to make them understand that perspective without ruining maybe their innocence or just like in that kind of way.
See, I'm a believer that with my own kids, I didn't want them to be innocent in the sense of I wanted them to see what I was doing. I wanted them to see, I've always kind of, you know, they're older now, but when they were younger, I always tried to make sure they understood. But, you know, I came from a lot of privilege, so it was making sure they understood that other parts of New York existed and that they weren't scared to go to East New York. They weren't scared to go to the Bronx. They weren't scared to go to Queens, Jackson Heights. So I happen to believe that I think you really should, you know, and if you want to do that in a way that is kind of keeps them from too much danger, I think, you know, going to other congregations, you know, taking my kids to a church in the Bronx or taking my kids to a church in Queens is a perfect way, you know. Churches are a great opportunity because they're always welcoming to new people. You can just walk into any Catholic church in any place in the country and they're going to welcome you in, and you're going to see a very different attitude.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Megan. I'm a sophomore studying business analytics. And my question for you is, so like picture you're walking down the street and you find someone who you want to talk to. How do you go up to them and address them in a way and make them feel seen?
It's about time. Like you can't rush it. And one of the things I always say to people, and the dynamic between a male and female is very different between two males or two females. So there's that issue. But just treat them like a normal person. And I know they may not look normal, but and that means, by the way, not sometimes liking them. That you don't have to like every homeless person. You don't have to. There are times you can just say, like you don't like everybody in this room. Well, maybe you do, but you don't like every one of your other Notre Dame classmates. You don't. So don't kind of force relationships or conversations that just don't come naturally. But it's a matter of just kind of small gestures, you know. When I see a guy, and you watch him enough and you know what he wants or what he needs, maybe he's lacking socks, just help him out with, toss him a thing of socks. I mean, for me, when it comes to other guys, it's always about sports. If they're wearing like a Bama shirt, I say Bama sucks, or something like that. It's just kind of small talk. But the thing is don't force it. The other big thing, and it's not, I want to tell kids here, but it's vaping, smoking. It's a kind of a bonding, a way for people to bond. Don't smoke, guys. But it's a way to kind of like, share a cigarette, share a talk.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mary, and I've read your work and really appreciated it over the years, and I use it in my classroom, the front row, back row dynamic. So I have many questions I'd want to ask, but the one that keeps surfacing from your talk last night and what you've said here today, you talked about how the front row has really benefited a lot by globalization and the back row really lost. Really, you said that last night. They were very big losers. And that sets up some of the concerns we have, like how can we reach out, how can we be more open, how can we bridge gaps? But a big part of human dignity, it seems to me, as a Catholic, is our ability to do good for other people. And so my question for you is, what good have the people you encountered in Hunts Point and these other places done for you? They have had something to offer you, and I just wanted to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, the faith, so much. This is my third career, and this is the one that's made me the happiest. And I think, and it's primarily because of what I've learned from people. Giving me a proper perspective, grounding me in reality, kind of bringing me down from a kind of arrogant level to a less arrogant level. Still arrogant, but so the people I've met have changed how I see the world, and I'm immensely grateful for that. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't. It's about the people I meet at the end of the day. So. But the biggest thing that they've done for me is, again, as a faith, is, kind of reminding me that kind of taking kind of the arrogant, jerky atheist and kind of gently moving them to something a little bit less jerky and less atheist, so.
Hi, my name is George Henderly. I'm a retired professor in the Mendoza College. And my question, or I have two questions. One question is about how has your experience at Wall Street on the one hand and experience in the Bronx on the other hand shaped your political views? Yes.
That's a hard one. I mean, I'm certainly less certain what I believe than I did before. I guess when I kind of, 2010 or so when I started this, I was kind of a classic Wall Street neoliberal technocrat, kind of. And now I guess I'm kind of without any party. I started questioning kind of a very, very economic framework. We look at everything in a very hard economic. I started questioning free trade. I started questioning globalism. I've actually become a stronger advocate of immigration than I was before. So that kind of is about the same. I've also learned that I think the biggest change is that I should probably shut up more about politics because if I was so wrong before, how do I know if I'm right now? So it's kind of been a more humbling recognition that I'm not really sure I know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. And my second question is about the title of your book is Dignity. And you know that dignity was the key term also when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was discussed under the leadership of Eleanor Roosevelt many years ago after the Second World War and the Holocaust. How do you see dignity related to human rights in the Bronx or even human rights in business?
Yeah, I think, both my parents, my father left Germany because of his Jewish background, and so he actually, one of the things he, one of the areas especially he wrote about was Holocaust studies. So, they were very, very strong advocates of human rights, and I think, they were more. My father's work was more focused on, political prisoners and things like that. But I think when I got to the Bronx, I started realizing that there, within the U.S. there are a lot of human rights issues, and I view kind of, the fact that we our country that's so massively wealthy, and I travel around the world a lot, and no country has the homeless problem and the addiction problems that the U.S. has, and I view that as kind of a human right issue here in the U.S. that we allow, in a country that's so wealthy as this, and just the wealthiest in the world, that we continue to have effectively a segment of the population that nobody wants to deal with, nobody wants to look at, nobody wants to talk to, nobody wants to put in help. To me, it's an extraordinarily embarrassing situation that we as a country should be embarrassed by.
Do we have other questions from, oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Hi, I'm Raquel. I'm a freshman. I'm studying neuroscience, and I was just wondering if you ever see hope in those that you said were in the back row, like trying to move to the front, or would you say that they've settled and found peace in their place in the universe?
One of the places I also go to when I come to Newtown is I go to the community colleges, and I think there's I think kind of the problem with doing kind of an ethnographic type front row, back row like I did is it misses out on a lot of people in the middle, and that includes kind of what I call the aspirational back row class. It's kind of people who are able to work themselves up, I think there's you meet those in every town you go to. You meet the kids who we've heard from a few here today who come from kind of communities that are not traditionally produce a lot of college students who end up going to college, and I think those are wonderful stories. But I also think that there needs to be a recognition that that's how hard that is, and how I used to work with a nonprofit in the Bronx that Hunts Point Alliance for Children. And it was very sad to see that these kids had to do perfectly. It was a tightrope to walk to get from the back row to the front row. That required both. They get pressures on both sides. There's a lack of understanding. There's just two different cultures, and there's a lot of an absence of cultural capital about just knowing how this kind of university places operate. And then coming from the back row, there's just lots of pressures not to quote sell out, not to act white, all of those things. And I think it's just while those state cases certainly need to be celebrated, it needs to be mindful of how hard it is to achieve it and how many people don't.
Are there any other questions in the audience? One more? This will be our final question.
I'm curious about responses to your work, and most specifically, is there anything that you've gotten in response or that you've heard from people that you find especially gratifying or hopeful or satisfying?
Yeah, you know, the emails I get from basically parents of addicts, people, parents or brothers and sisters of addicts who might not have made it. But you know, probably the strongest one I got was from a guy who had read my book and went out and located his brother who had been living on the streets, and managed to kind of find him and spend a few weeks with him before he died, because he was terminally ill. You know, it was just, he thanked me for getting him the activation energy to go out and locate his brother again. But you know, so that's been, I mean, I've gotten some hate, but you know, when you get an email or a letter like that, that just wipes away all the hate.
So on that, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Dr. Chris Arnade.